It's a memoir of my life. It's the first time we've ever had.
Rachael Ray was in every kitchen, on every screen, making cooking look fun and easy. And then things got very quiet around her name. The headlines changed, and a woman the whole world thought they knew completely started looking like someone with a much bigger story, hiding just beneath the surface. What really happened to her, and who is she now? Join us as we uncover the new Rachael Ray. Origins and rise to fame. Every big story has a small beginning, and for Rachael Ray, it started somewhere most people would never expect. Not a fancy restaurant, not a culinary school, just a regular gourmet food market in upstate New York called Mozzarelli's in Albany. Her job there was simple, helping customers find ingredients and figure out what to cook with them. But she kept noticing the same thing happening over and over again. People would walk in, pick up everything they needed for a proper home-cooked meal, and then quietly put it all back on the shelf. Not because they didn't want to cook, but because they felt like they didn't have the time, the energy, or the confidence to pull it off after a long day. Rachael decided to do something about it, so she started showing customers how to build a full, satisfying meal in 30 minutes flat. Not 30 minutes of prep, followed by an hour at the stove, but start to finish, 30 minutes total. The idea wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about making real food feel possible for real people on a Tuesday night, when they were tired and just wanted to eat something good at home. Word spread quickly, and in the year 2000, she turned the concept into her first cookbook, simply called 30-Minute Meals.
Now, I've already made the slaw topper for my barbecue chicken burgers.
It didn't promise anything glamorous, just something genuinely useful. That ordinary busy people could feed themselves and their families without sacrificing their whole evening to do it. The book sold well, and the right people started paying attention. Food Network executives came calling, drawn in by this warm, no-nonsense woman who made the kitchen feel approachable rather than intimidating. They offered her a show. She said yes. And in 2002, 30-Minute Meals premiered on television, running all the way until 2019. She wasn't performing on camera, she was just talking to viewers like a friend standing next to them at the counter, and that made all the difference. From there, the brand expanded steadily, more shows, a magazine launch in 2005, a daytime talk show that ran from 2006 all the way to 2023, over 20 cookbooks, product lines, and a nonprofit dedicated to food education for kids. Rachael Ray had gone from helping nervous grocery shoppers figure out dinner to becoming one of the most recognizable names in American food culture, and she had done it entirely on her own terms. But behind all of that success, there were things the cameras never showed, things that had nothing to do with recipes and everything to do with who she really was when nobody was watching. The voice behind the brand. Anyone who has ever heard Rachael Ray speak knows her voice is impossible to forget. Deep, a little rough, warm in a way that feels lived in, like it belongs to someone who has been through something and come out the other side with stories to tell. That distinctive raspy quality became one of the most recognizable things about her, fitting her personality so naturally that it almost felt like she had designed it that way, bold without being harsh, real without being rough. Viewers loved it because it didn't sound polished or produced. It sounded like a person, and for years it was simply part of who Rachael Ray was on screen. What most people didn't know was that the voice came with a history, and not a particularly easy one. For a long time, rumors floated around suggesting she was a heavy smoker, or that the raspiness was a put-on, some kind of character choice made to seem more interesting or edgy on television. Neither of those things were true, and Rachael addressed them plainly whenever they came up. The real story began when she was just a young child, when she had a serious case of croup, a respiratory illness that causes the airways to swell, making breathing difficult and putting intense pressure on the vocal cords. For most children, it passes cleanly, leaving no permanent damage, but Rachael's case was severe enough to leave a lasting mark on her voice. The croup changed the way her vocal cords developed, and from that point on, her voice simply grew in a different direction than most people's, carrying that deep, textured quality that would eventually become her trademark. She built a whole career on that voice, but it also came with real medical consequences, and in 2008, those consequences caught up with her when doctors discovered a cyst growing on one of her vocal cords. Surgery was necessary to remove it, and afterward she was placed on complete vocal rest for 1 full week. No speaking at all for a woman whose entire livelihood depended on talking in front of cameras every single day. She followed the orders, rested her voice, and came back stronger for it. Even after recovering, protecting her voice became an ongoing commitment, with regular visits to a specialist, dedicated vocal exercises, and lifestyle adjustments like reducing caffeine, which can dry out and irritate the cords over time. The effortless warmth people heard on screen was something she quietly worked to maintain every single day. Her voice was not the only part of her that had required that kind of quiet, determined protection, because long before the television deals and the cookbooks, her personal safety had been put to the test in ways far more frightening than a medical procedure. Twice attacked in New York City. In 1995, Rachael Ray packed up and moved to New York City, drawn by the same pull that brings so many young, ambitious people to that place. The sense that something is waiting there for you, that the city is the right stage for whatever comes next. It didn't take long for the city to push back, and hard. Not long after settling in, she was walking into her own apartment building when a man approached her with a gun, demanding what she had, giving her no warning and no room to think. She had a can of mace on her, used it in the moment, and managed to escape, shaken but unhurt. Most people, after surviving something like that, would already be reconsidering a lot of things, their routines, their neighborhood, whether the city was really worth what it was asking of them. But Rachael was still processing the first attack when the second one happened, just 1 week later, in a moment that must have felt almost impossible to believe. The same man found her again, and this time there was no escape, no mace, no running, only a physical beating in an alley that left her far more than shaken. 2 attacks, 1 week apart, same attacker. That kind of pattern doesn't feel like random city danger anymore. It feels personal. And that distinction matters because it changes how safe anywhere can feel afterward. Rachael made her decision, and it was a clear one. She was done with New York City. She gathered her things and moved back to upstate New York, back to familiar ground, back to the place where people knew her name and she knew theirs. That move, as painful as the circumstances behind it were, turned out to redirect everything. Back upstate, she found steady footing again, landed at the food market in Albany, developed the 30-minute meal idea that would eventually catch the attention of Food Network, and began building the career that would make her a household name. The very thing that sent her running from the city ended up pointing her straight toward her future. She rarely brought those attacks into public conversation. They weren't part of the warm and energetic image her brand projected, but they were part of her story, whether she talked about them or not. Proof that long before the world knew her name, she had already survived things that would have stopped a lot of people entirely. And she had kept moving anyway, quietly and without making a performance of it. That quiet resilience would be tested again and again in ways she never could have predicted. Because the next wave of challenges wouldn't come from a dark street corner, they would come from the full glare of public life. The Dunkin' Donuts firestorm. Some controversies find you when you least expect them, and for Rachael Ray, one of the messiest public battles of her career arrived wrapped in a paper coffee cup and a patterned scarf. The partnership with Dunkin' Donuts made complete sense on paper. Here was a woman who had built her entire brand around accessible, everyday food, teaming up with a chain that had spent decades selling ordinary Americans their morning coffee and breakfast before a long day of work. Nothing about it seemed controversial. Nothing about it seemed like it would blow up into a national argument. And yet, somehow, it did both. The first hit came from celebrity chef Anthony Bourdain, who had never been shy about his opinions and wasn't about to start now. He went after Rachael publicly and with real force, calling her evil and accusing her of teaching children to eat badly, of normalizing processed food, of using her enormous platform to point people in exactly the wrong direction. It was the kind of attack that gets picked up and repeated, and it was, widely and loudly. Rachael didn't crumble under it. She pushed back with specifics, pointing out that Dunkin' was actively working to improve its menu, that she had grown up drinking their coffee as part of regular family life, and that the deal itself was structured to funnel support into her non-profit organization, Yummo, which was dedicated to teaching kids and families about healthy eating. The attack, she argued, had missed the point almost entirely. Then, before that noise had even settled, a second wave hit from a completely different direction. A photograph from the Dunkin' advertisement showed Rachel wearing a black and white patterned scarf around her neck. And certain commentators online and in the media decided that scarf was a political symbol, a keffiyeh, and began treating its presence in a coffee commercial as some kind of coded statement. The accusation spread fast, picked up by people who were already looking for reasons to be angry, and suddenly a scarf in an ad became a national conversation. Rachel and Duncan both responded, clarifying that the scarf was simply a scarf, a paisley print with no political meaning attached to it whatsoever. But once that kind of story gets moving, it tends to keep moving regardless of the facts, and the noise dragged on longer than it had any reason to. What that firestorm revealed, more than anything else, was how quickly a public figure can be pulled into a storm that has almost nothing to do with who they actually are. And the next controversy Rachel faced would prove that point even more dramatically, because it wasn't even really about her at all. Mistaken identity, the Beyoncé scandal. There are public controversies that come from something a person actually did. And then there are the ones that arrive because of a name. Just a name, sitting too close to another name in the middle of an internet firestorm. And that is almost exactly what happened to Rachael Ray in the spring of 2016. When Beyoncé released her visual album Lemonade, the world paid attention in the way it always does when Beyoncé does something significant, completely and immediately. Buried inside the project was a lyric, a reference to someone called Becky with the good hair. And within hours, the internet had decided it needed to figure out who that person was. Convinced it was a real woman connected to rumors about Jay-Z's fidelity. Online speculation landed on Rachael Ray, a fashion designer with a name that sounded, to anyone skimming quickly, almost identical to Rachael Ray, television host and cookbook author. The difference was one letter and a great deal of professional distance, but in the speed and heat of viral outrage, that distinction collapsed almost immediately. Thousands of people flooded Rachael Ray's social media accounts, her website, her public profiles, with accusations, insults, and the particular kind of fury that comes from a crowd that believes it is delivering justice. They called her a homewrecker, attacked her appearance and her character, and treated her as guilty of something she had absolutely no connection to, all because they had mixed up two women who shared a first name and a last name that rhymed. Rachael Ray had not appeared in Lemonade, had no relationship with Jay-Z, had nothing whatsoever to do with any of it, and the mistake was eventually recognized and corrected by enough people that the worst of the storm passed. But the correction always travels slower than the accusation, and by the time things settled down, the damage had already been done. The insults had been sent, the posts had been shared, the assumptions had hardened in the minds of people who never went back to check whether they had the right person. What the whole episode illustrated with uncomfortable clarity was how fragile a reputation can be in the age of social media, where outrage moves faster than fact-checking, and a single misread name can bring thousands of strangers to someone's door, absolutely certain they have the right address. Rachel had learned to weather public criticism by that point, but criticism based on something real is one thing. Being targeted for someone else's story entirely is something different and harder in its own way. Tabloid rumors about her marriage. There is a particular kind of story that the tabloid press loves to tell about successful women, and it usually involves their relationship falling apart in some dramatic, humiliating way. Because the idea of a woman who has built something big and kept her personal life intact at the same time doesn't generate nearly as many clicks as the alternative. Rachael Ray married John Cusimano in 2005, a man who carried an unusual combination of interests. He was a musician, an actor, and a trained lawyer, someone with enough range to exist comfortably in the world Rachel inhabited without being swallowed by it. By most visible accounts, they were genuinely well-matched, sharing a loud enthusiasm for food, travel, and each other's company in a way that came across as real rather than performed. The tabloids came for that picture almost immediately, and they kept coming back. In 2007, stories began circulating that John had been unfaithful, that the marriage was in trouble, that things behind closed doors looked nothing like the easy warmth the couple projected in public. Rachel addressed it directly and without drama, denying the rumors clearly and declining to treat the question as one that deserved more than a straightforward answer. That should have been the end of it, but the press doesn't always want the end of it. And in 2013, a new round of stories appeared, this time involving claims about the couple allegedly attending a swingers club, the kind of story designed less to inform than to provoke, carrying just enough vague specificity to be difficult to fully dismiss. A denial came through her publicist, firm and brief, and again, Rachael chose not to give the story more oxygen by engaging with it at length. What is notable across both episodes and the smaller rumors that surfaced in the years between them is the consistency of her response, which was essentially to refuse to perform distress for an audience that was hoping to watch her unravel. She didn't give tearful interviews, didn't use her talk show platform to deliver pointed monologues about the cruelty of the press, didn't fight the stories with the kind of public drama that would have made them bigger than they already were. She and John stayed together, continued building their life, and presented the same picture of a functional, affectionate partnership that they always had, which in its own quiet way was the most effective response available to her.
We're very volatile. My husband's an Italian, I'm an Italian. We blow up and then it's gone. We don't hold grudges with each other.
Holding a marriage together under that kind of public scrutiny requires a certain kind of steadiness, but the challenges waiting just ahead for Rachael Ray would require something even deeper than that, because the next loss she faced was not a rumor or a misunderstanding. It was real, and it arrived at the worst possible time. A family tragedy turned public feud. There are griefs that stay private and griefs that don't. And sometimes the difference between the two has nothing to do with what the person at the center of it chooses, because someone else makes that choice for them. And suddenly, the most painful thing in your life is being discussed by strangers who only have one side of the story. In late 2013, Rachael Ray's aunt passed away under circumstances that were as heartbreaking as they were unexpected. She had accidentally locked herself out of her home during freezing weather and, unable to get back inside, succumbed to the cold. A death that was tragic in the particular quiet way that accidents are, without drama or warning. Just a terrible outcome from an ordinary moment gone wrong. Rachael and her husband John did not make it to the funeral, and the reason was work, commitments that had been scheduled, obligations that couldn't be moved. The kind of logistical reality that anyone who has managed a demanding career has encountered at the worst possible moment. That sickening collision between professional responsibility and personal loss, where there is no clean answer and no option that doesn't cost something. A cousin decided to speak about it publicly, going to the media with a version of events that framed Rachael's absence as a choice made out of indifference rather than circumstance, painting a picture of a woman too consumed by her career and her celebrity to show up for her own family when it mattered most. The story got picked up, repeated, and shaped by people who had no access to the full picture and no particular incentive to seek it out. What made the whole thing especially difficult to watch was the way it stripped away the privacy that grief is supposed to have, turning a family's loss into a piece of public content for people to form opinions about from a distance, armed with nothing but a single account from a single source with an obvious emotional stake in how the story landed. Rachael did not respond publicly in any significant way, which was consistent with how she tended to handle personal attacks, by declining to add fuel, by refusing to turn a painful private situation into a louder public argument, by absorbing the judgment without staging a counter-performance for the cameras. Whether she was right or wrong to miss that funeral is something only the people who were actually living those circumstances could honestly assess. And the public never had enough information to make that call fairly, not that it stopped anyone from making it. Family grief is hard enough to carry privately, but Rachael Ray was about to face a loss of an entirely different kind, one that was visible, total, and impossible to hide from anyone, because it happened in broad daylight and left nothing standing. The house fire. There are things you can prepare for, and things you simply cannot. And losing your home to fire on a summer evening during a global pandemic, watching the place where you built your private life disappear into smoke and flame, sits firmly and completely in the second category. In August of 2020, a fire broke out at Rachael Ray's home in Lake Luzerne, New York, the upstate property she had designed and built nearly 2 decades earlier, the place she had returned to again and again, between television seasons and press tours, the home that existed specifically as the private counterweight to her very public career. The fire started in the chimney, spread quickly to the roof, and by the time it was over, the house was a total loss. Not damaged, not partially salvageable, gone. The timing made everything heavier because this was the summer of 2020, when the entire world was already living inside an ongoing crisis, when the usual structures of normal life had been suspended, when people were leaning harder than ever on home as the one stable thing remaining in an unstable moment. To lose a home in ordinary times is devastating, but to lose it then, in the middle of all that collective uncertainty, carried a particular weight that is difficult to overstate. Rachael spoke about the aftermath with the kind of honesty that had always defined her public voice, acknowledging that what she lost wasn't just walls and furniture, but accumulated memory. The specific texture of a private life built over years in a particular place. The kind of thing that cannot simply be replaced by rebuilding on the same ground because the new structure will be new, and the old one and everything it held is simply gone. What she did with that loss, however, said something important about who she was, because rather than retreating entirely into the experience, she used it as a starting point for something outward-facing, launching a project she called Rachael Ray's Rebuild, designed to help other families who had lost their homes to disasters of various kinds, turning her own painful experience into practical support for people going through something similar without her resources or her platform. It was a very Rachael Ray kind of response. Not theatrical, not self-congratulatory, just the instinct to take something hard and find a way to make it useful, to let the worst moment become the reason for something that helps someone else get through their own. The fire took her home, but it didn't take the resilience that had been building in her since long before anyone knew her name. And that resilience was about to be tested in yet another way. This time, not by circumstance or tragedy, but by the persistent, grinding weight of public criticism that had followed her career almost from the very beginning. The phony label and ongoing criticism. There is a specific kind of criticism that follows certain public figures not because of anything they have actually done wrong, but because of what they represent: accessibility, warmth, the deliberate choice to meet ordinary people where they are, rather than where a certain kind of tastemaker thinks they ought to be. And Rachael Ray absorbed that kind of criticism for the better part of 2 decades with a consistency that says as much about her critics as it does about her. The most persistent attack was the simplest one: that she had no formal culinary training, no cooking school diploma, no classical foundation beneath the cheerful efficiency she brought to the camera every day. The criticism landed as though it were an exposure of something hidden, a secret hypocrisy finally brought to light, when in reality, Rachael had never claimed any of those credentials, not once, not anywhere. She had always been exactly what she presented herself as: a home cook who figured things out practically, not a chef. And the distinction was one she made openly and without embarrassment from the very beginning of her career. Anonymous stories about diva behavior on set circulated for years, the kind of claims that are almost impossible to verify or disprove, precisely because they come with no names attached, passed along and repeated until repetition itself starts to feel like evidence, which it isn't, but which tends to be treated as though it is when the target is a successful woman with a large public profile. Speculation about plastic surgery arrived on a reliable schedule, framed less as curiosity and more as accusation, as though the appearance of a woman in her 40s on television were a document requiring scrutiny and annotation, a problem to be explained and judged rather than simply a person aging in public the way everyone does. Then there was the fabricated feud with Oprah Winfrey, a story that required people to ignore a fairly significant piece of contradictory evidence: that Oprah's own production company was directly involved in producing Rachael's talk show, a level of professional collaboration that doesn't typically exist between people who despise each other, but which did nothing to slow down the narrative for those who had already decided to believe it. What the full pattern of criticism reveals, taken together and looked at honestly, is less a portrait of a flawed public figure, and more a portrait of how public figures, particularly women who become successful without the approval of the institutions that usually grant it, tend to get treated, with the bar for skepticism set much lower, and the bar for giving benefit of the doubt set much higher than basic fairness would suggest it ought to be. Rachael Ray built something real, survived things genuinely difficult, and kept showing up, and that, in the end, is a story worth telling straight. Conclusion: Rachael Ray's story is not the kind that fits neatly into a single headline, because it was never just a success story. Even though the success was real and the scale of it was remarkable, It was also a story about what it costs to build something in public, and what it takes to keep standing while the world forms its opinions from a distance. She started in a grocery store in upstate New York, solving a small everyday problem for tired people who just wanted to eat something decent at home. And that modest, practical instinct carried her further than anyone watching her demonstrate a weeknight pasta in Albany could have reasonably predicted. Along the way, she survived violent attacks, a serious surgery, the random cruelty of mistaken identity, tabloid campaigns against her marriage, a family grief turned public spectacle, and the total loss of the home she had spent 20 years building. And she moved through all of it with a consistency that the people loudest in their criticism of her rarely managed to match. What her story quietly asks underneath all the noise is a question worth sitting with about how public figures are covered, how women in particular are judged when they achieve visibility without the right credentials or the right kind of approval, and whether the stories told about them are ever really as accurate as the confidence with which they are told suggests. Rachael Ray kept cooking, kept showing up, and kept moving forward, which was always at its core exactly the point. What part of his story touched you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. Like this video, and subscribe for more incredible stories just like this one.